to this year's BLR Benefit Narrative Arc. My name is Melissa Pagnata, and I am BLR's Communications Manager. Tonight, we are celebrating the special relationship between writers and readers. We'll take a look at how some of our favorite writers develop their pieces, learn a bit about what goes on BLR behind the scenes, take some art studio tours, and hear from some readers who wanted to share their favorite BLR pieces with us. Oh! But most importantly, there will be cats. We have a great event ahead of us. Lola is so excited that she skipped her 17th nap of the day just to be here. So without further ado, enjoy Narrative Arc.
Hello and welcome. I'm Danielle Ofri, Editor-in-Chief of Bellevue Literary Review, and I want to welcome everyone to BLR's 2023 Benefit. This year's Benefit is entitled Narrative Arc, The Journey from Writer to Reader. At BLR, one of our main purposes is to be forging bonds between readers and writers. And usually that's in the form of the written word. But tonight, we're going to actually bring those writers and readers together to meet each other for the first time. We asked our BLR readers to send us their favorite stories, essays, and poems, and then invited the writers to join the readers for just a short conversation. For readers, this is often the first time they've ever met the author of anything they've read in a book or a journal. And for writers, who mostly toil alone, well, there's nothing more special than meeting a reader who loves your work and has been moved by what you've written. Tonight's benefit, of course, is a fundraiser, and we hope you will make a donation. BLR is a unique journal that uses creative writing to explore health, illness, and healing, perhaps the most universal aspects of the human condition. Since our very first issue in 2001, BLR has grown immensely, publishing 45 issues of poetry, fiction, and nonfiction, and also branching out to online events, in-person events, dance, film, and art. BLR has won awards from the Writing Foundation, been recognized in the Best American Series and the Pushcart Prizes, has received support from the National Endowment for the Arts, the New York State Council on the Arts, Amazon Literary Partnership, AARP, the Laurie M. Tisch Illumination Fund, and the Oliver Sacks Foundation. The Whiting Literary Prize Committee said, quote, BLR is loyal to its theme but never constrained by it, uncovering boundless tonal and narrative possibilities. And our good friends at the Oliver Sacks Foundation wrote, with every issue, Bellevue Literary Review probes our understanding of the human body and mind in new ways. It is essential reading for anyone who deals with sickness and health, anyone interested in narrative medicine, anyone who simply needs a dose of deep grace and humanity. And we hope that tonight and all year long, BLR is able to share with you a dose of grace and humanity, and that you will help support BLR tonight. Every gift, no matter how small or how large, is put to immediate good use. Printing the journal, paying our writers and artists, something that we are absolutely committed to, creating events, collaborating with other arts organizations to continually explore health, illness, and healing in the most creative ways possible. If you've already made a gift, thank you so much. If you haven't yet, we hope you will join the BLR community of supporters. I'm joined now by Doris W. Cheng, one of BLR's fiction editors, to talk a little bit about that journey from writer to reader. Welcome, Doris.
Thanks, Danielle.
So our theme tonight is Narrative Arc, the journey from writer to reader. Can you talk to us about how that journey starts as a writer? Where does it begin?
Well, I think as a writer, it begins with a thought or an emotion, and ideally both, because I think the best writing is something that can engage both your head and your heart. And then after that, it's creating a world with your words where you're inviting the reader into the space that you're making.
I like that idea, the space that you create. And then as a reader, what is it like to be on the other end of that arc?
Well, for a reader, it's entering into that connection with the writer and being willing to go into the space that they're making for you, where you're not just finding meaning, but you're actively making meaning in a way that's unique and personal to you. Because the way that you read something is individual, and it's so different from the way someone else might read the same piece of writing. And I think that's what makes the relationship between writer and reader so special.
And maybe different than the way the writer is reading the piece as well.
Absolutely. Readers will find things that writers had no idea was there.
Right. Well, so we are very pleased then to introduce our pair of writer-readers. Now, bear in mind that these folks have never met before. They were only connected invisibly by the words that one wrote and the other read. Reader Maureen Miller wrote to us about how much she loved the story The Facts that was published in BLR's third issue 20 years ago. This choice resonates with me. The story is called The Facts because I was the one who happened to pluck it out of a slush pile, and I edited it. And I've never forgotten it because it interrogates what exactly are the facts of a story and what gets left out. So now please welcome author Mark Rigney, who gets to chat with reader and fan Maureen Miller.
Hi, BLR. My name is Maureen Miller. I'm a graduate of NYU School of Medicine and the residency at Bellevue Hospital in Pathology. And I'm thrilled to have here with me today Mark Rigney, the author of a story in issue 3 of the Bellevue Literary Review called The Facts. This piece stood out to me as this antic and comic piece that I just adored the second I saw it. Just a brief intro to the story. This discusses an elderly man named Lewis Kohler, who dies somewhat mysteriously at a lake. And the investigation seems to focus in the local media on 2 of his home health caretakers, one of whom is a Black man named Morris, and another of whom is a cantankerous white woman named Kaylee. I really liked how vivid they are, and there's a lot of play with like media satire, healthcare satire, and the fact that it was published over 20 years ago, right after 9/11, is really unbelievable. In some ways, it's so prescient about the precarity in the healthcare economy. So with that, I'll have you take it away here, Mark.
End of story. On to the epilogues. Kaylee Linderbuck continued her stint with home health for another 7 years, during which time she applied for disability leave on 5 separate occasions, 4 of which were granted. She died of a heart attack while bobbing unhappily through a water aerobics class at Home Health's private health club. Morris S. Miles sank into a fierce and crippling bout of depression, a lonesome struggle which saw him move through 3 Ohio cities in less than 2 years. He tried churches, he tried dating, he tried drugs. For a time, he was addicted to painkillers, sleeping pills, and caffeine all at once. He took up bowling. He joined a cult and became, for a period of almost 3 weeks, Shining Star, blessed child of the cosmos. He developed a liking for canned pears, and it was this more than anything else that drew him back to the world. Morris moved one last time to Alaska, a fact the newspapers missed, for they were on to the next scent. In Alaska, we lose sight of Morris, for the papers there are different, consumed as they are with local road conditions and the 40,000 names for snow. For Lewis, there can be no epilogue, except to remember that for all the details added here, for all our pathetic attempts to do justice to his life, we have only begun to discern the steps of his dance, the pattern of his music, and the marvel of all that we must miss.
One thing that I found very interesting about this is the sense of ancestry. There's references to indigenous inheritance of the land. Like you talk about it being the lake where Lewis died being on Shawnee land, and there are several references to who owns a place or not. So, I mean, what was your thought process doing that?
I think I'm interested in memory in general. This story certainly strikes me as a kind of memory piece. And because it's based on an actual newspaper clipping that I bumped into, there really was a drowning. Antrim Park is a real place. And I read some tiny little snippet about someone in a wheelchair who drowned. And I thought, how can that be? And so I invented a story to explain it. And all the things that weren't in the clipping became this, I suppose, this sort of a diatribe about all the things we've left out. I am curious, was reading the facts an emotional experience?
Yeah, no, when I first read this, I was into the comedy, but it actually did, and I'm going to pull why I picked the epilogue, basically. The last line just, slayed me. For Lewis, there can be no epilogue. We've only begun to discern the steps of his dance, the pattern of his music, and the marvel of all that we must miss. And this story felt very real to me in a way that I would not have felt before starting medical school.
I feel like the full meal in fiction is for something to have emotional weight and not just a satisfying resolution. But I like something best of all that makes me laugh and then rips my heart out. And I don't always know whether I have achieved that because I'm rarely in touch with people who've actually read my work.
Oh, wow. Okay, well, if I am the first here, let me tell everybody at this benefit, you should read this guy's work. This man here writes horror, he writes science fiction, he writes plays, he writes comedies. This is Mark Rigney. If you've never read his work before, I encourage you to do so. And if you, like me, are a reader of the Bellevue Literary Review, please give money to have more small magazines proliferating in the world. And Mark, it's been a real pleasure to talk to you. This is our first meeting, but it was just fascinating conversation, so thank you.
Thank you. It's great to meet you, Maureen.
I think it's so interesting what Mark is saying about how he came to write the story, because he saw something on the news and he had questions about it and he responded to it. And I think that's what writers do. We pay attention to the world around us, we ask questions of it, and we try to make meaning of it and invite the reader into our perspective. I also think when Maureen told Mark that what he wrote slayed her is such a great example of the magic that happens between writer and reader. For a reader, there's nothing more profound than finding yourself changed after reading a piece of writing. And for a writer, there's nothing more powerful than knowing that you've moved somebody with your words.
Right. I always think that, we toil away and scribble words on a page. You've no idea if or how anyone will ever receive them. So it's such a gas when you meet someone who has received it. Have you ever met any of your readers?
I have. I've been lucky to meet readers of my work, and it's incredibly fulfilling when someone says that they felt a certain way or that they thought about something differently after reading what I wrote. And knowing that if I meet a writer whose work I admire, I always try to pay it forward and let them know how important their work was to me.
Yeah, well, I just love the idea of bringing writers and readers together. And it makes us kind of feel like matchmakers here at BLR. And we hope that you who are watching tonight will support this matchmaking. Tonight's event is a benefit, the time of year that we reach out to you, our community, with a direct ask for your financial support. Your donation helps us print the journal, pay the writers, and mail the journal to the readers, completing that narrative arc. So please make your donation today. Sig-Linda Jacobson is one of BLR's readers and a staunch supporter, and she's actually become a monthly sustainer of BLR, something that provides incredibly solid footing for BLR's operations. And I caught up with Sig-Linda recently at Madison Square Park here in Manhattan. Sig-Linda, tell us how you got to hear or know about Bellevue Literary Review.
Well, it goes way back to when I was a child and I was interested in medicine, and I read everything I could get my hands on about doctors and nurses, fiction and nonfiction. And eventually I went to medical school and realized that the stories are actually in each of the patients that we see in our practices, and we weren't taught much about that in our curriculum, but I just always felt there should be something there. And then my daughter came to Columbia University and she gave me a subscription to the Bellevue Literary Review for Christmas one year, and I was amazed. It was just what I'd been hunting for. Addressing issues in medicine that aren't strictly medical, but part of the human experience.
Right. So is there an issue that stays with you that you recall?
The one on disabilities and abilities is the one that first comes to mind. I was aware, of course, intellectually that there's barriers set up in the way society is constructed that keeps people with different abilities from doing everything, but this really brought it home in hearing individual stories and how these things impact their lives.
Yeah, and I think, remember, we call this issue Abilities and Disabilities, the Range of Human Function.
Yes,
which I always
and
love.
yes, because we all have some sort of, not necessarily disability, but things that we don't do as well as others that can have an impact on how decisions we make about our lives.
Right. And we've had the theme issues every fall, which have been among the most popular. This is the displacement issue. That was a great one. Recovery, which really rang true, especially after the pandemic.
Yes.
Yeah. A Good Life, thinking about how things could be good. Reading the Body, about thinking about anatomy and our body in literary and physical terms. And of course, our most recent one, Taking Care, about caregiving.
Yes.
And can you tell me why you're a supporter? Because you are a monthly donor, a sustaining donor. Tell me about that.
Well, I think this is so important. I want to give and make sure that it continues. And monthly donation, I think, is important because it's easier to give a small amount monthly than to sit down and write a check out for a large amount. And if you get it set up, then you don't have to worry about remembering to do something every month, and it adds up.
Yeah, and I'll say from the perspective of a nonprofit, having monthly support is so comforting, and it also allows us to plan, because then we'll know how much is coming in each month. And while we absolutely love and appreciate, annual donations, there's something about a monthly sustainer donor that makes it easy to think far out in advance. So I hope you'll join Sig-Linda and become a monthly donor for BLR. Thank you, Sig-Linda, for being a supporter of BLR in so many ways. Direct financial support in the form of donations, especially monthly sustaining donations like Sig-Linda's, makes such a difference in continuing to bring art and literature to the world. And so I invite you to consider a monthly donation of $25, $50, or $100. BLR is committed to paying its writers for their work, and we recently increased these payments by 50%. Ask any poet you know, this is not a common occurrence. Your support enables us to do this, so thank you. And speaking of poets, it is now time for poetry. We asked one of our board members, Dr. Ashley McMullen, for a memorable piece of BLR writing, any genre. And she immediately came back to us with the poem, The James Webb Telescope Detects a Heartbeat, from issue 45. And there's nothing happier than a poet who learns that they have a fan. So we're delighted to bring together poet Tierney with his main #1 fan, BLR board member, Dr. Ashley McMullen.
It is my joy and honor to chat with you a little bit about one of my favorite poems. I'm wondering if you could introduce yourself and then maybe read your poem for us.
Yeah, so I'm Tierney. I write poetry and fiction, and the poem is called The James Webb Telescope Detects a Heartbeat. They say the pulses come from a distant galaxy, an infant cluster in the first moment of birth. But I wonder if the heartbeat is yours, there in your nebula of blood and gas, mindlessly chewing the corners of your blanket with toothless gums, your eyes still shut to the screaming light. The weave of distance and time, where you will always be our first child, the edge of our farthest vision. We squint in every spectrum just to see you the way you are, though we know it's the way you were, what you might have been, larger than we can imagine, and farther than any lost prayer, your growth beyond our lifespan. What do you see when you look our way? Are we even there, or are we infants like you?
It's so beautiful. It feels even more profound hearing you read it.
When we're looking back at, in time again, the stars are very young, but by the time we actually see the light, they're actually very old.
Yes.
So it's just fascinating how memory and time, work together in both the way we conceive ourselves and our losses, and also the way we're learning how to conceive the universe.
And I think that is such a fascinating and incredible concept of literally looking back in time, just given the amount of distance those photons have to travel. And you're integrating that into this question of how we interpret, memory along those lines, I think is so cool.
We're looking at these galaxies just being born, or, in this case, maybe a child that hasn't been born yet. But by the time we experience them, they can be looking at us in the same way. In this case, like I was saying, hearing that the telescope detected a heartbeat just rang a bell with me. Not only the simplicity, but also the complexity of that kind of observation. So I wanted to also ask you, you have amazing, biography. I read several different sketches, and you're very interested in using narrative within medicine to teach medicine and to understand, medical things. And I'm curious to hear a little bit how that might work.
And I think that my journey into integrating storytelling more into my practice and how I teach actually helped me get through a pretty significant period of burnout in my training. It was a way to recapture the time and the human connection, particularly in scenarios in which I was really struggling to engage with certain individuals, and really being able to take a step back and kind of get out of the algorithmic and efficiency-driven mindset that can sometimes co-opt the medical experience, and really lean into like, what story am I bringing into this setting? Like, what story am I getting from this patient? How am I interpreting that, and how am I communicating that to my team and my colleagues, either through verbal communication or how I write about patients in the medical chart? I've always been drawn to medical providers who are storytellers. I always say that I started reading Danielle Ofri's books right before I started medical school. And, it was the first time I realized that you can be a doctor and a writer. And we are in the business of collecting and telling stories just by virtue of the work that we do. And one of the things I love the most about my job as a primary care doctor is that I get to really lean in and kind of watch stories unfold over time with the patients that I take care of. And it helps me change and grow and challenges my own narratives and adds more complexity into how I think about things. That's what stories do when they're at their best, is they open our minds into a deeper awareness of some things that we may not be seeing.
I always like to think of poetry as kind of bringing us to the edge of the unknown. We're really trying to understand or express things that we can't quite get to.
Yes.
And it often feels like if you name something, you kind of lose the mystery a little bit, and you lose the wonder. And so I think that, what stories and especially poetry can do is to kind of bring you to that edge, and hopefully bring the reading experience also to that edge. Because I think that's where we do kind of gain at least an intuitive understanding of things that are going on around us.
That is so well framed, kind of giving voice to the unknown and the ways of expressing things that are difficult to express, which comes up a lot in medicine. I think we as a profession struggle with the unknowns and are always trying to find different ways of naming things, framing a diagnosis, kind of having an understanding, which we have to do, which is part of the academic side of medicine is research and exploration. But some things, particularly when it comes to those deep human experiences, beg a different medium of expression than we often can offer.
You're also under a lot of pressure too, because people really do want to have the kind of black and white details of what's happening, and I'm not sure that's always available, but you have to try to express it.
Exactly. It's like a lot of times it's not available, but that's part of our job as a profession to help people be comfortable with some of the nuance, and also be honest about what we do and don't know, and sit with our patients in that unknown, which I know can be uncomfortable for us, but this is part of life.
Thank you so much for being part of it and the work that you put into it too.
Absolutely. It is my pleasure.
Thank you, Terry. Thank you, Ashley. That was beautiful. Joining me now to respond to this lovely narrative arc is BLR's new poetry editor, Monique Ferrell. Monique has just joined the BLR editorial board, but she is no stranger to BLR. She has written numerous wonderful book reviews for BLR, has published poetry in our pages, and has also been a BLR reviewer. And Monique, I'm wondering, what struck you about this conversation between writer and reader?
I was struck by the way poetry is so deeply connected to almost every aspect of the human condition: scientific query, healthcare, loss, mourning, but then healing and recovery. I felt that every single moment of that was discussed and explored and fleshed out and nurtured and then celebrated in that conversation between the two. And I find it to be representative of the importance of the work that BLR does.
I mean, it's amazing how something as compact as a poem can pack in so many things.
True, indeed. Yeah, which is what made the conversation so moving and so powerful. Also, it was just so honest and vulnerable in the way that, that is, it asks you to be at peace or comfortable. I believe she said that it's okay to sit with the uncomfortability of the unknown. It makes you sit with the uncomfortability of your feeling, of the intensity of your feeling, but then you feel so healed and calm at the end. It was, again, a lovely, lovely moment.
Now, in addition to being a poet, you are also a professor. And so I'm thinking how the narrative arc begins with emerging writers. So how do you encourage your students to begin the writing process and to develop their narrative voice?
Well, for the last 4 years, I've been focusing primarily on teaching African American literature and gender studies. And so there's a lot of scholarly writing that happens in those courses because we're trying to develop voices that can analyze critically. What I find in my students' writing is that as they begin the process of trying to interpret what they've read or what we've watched as a class, they always begin by writing these deeply personal anecdotes about their lives. And what I find in reading these is that I'm watching the becoming of a poet, of a fiction writer. And so I try to be very encouraging by saying, hey, this is a very unique, wonderfully crafted voice. Please think about taking courses in poetry, fiction, creative nonfiction, playwriting. There's something special here. And they're so happy and receptive to that. And they're always willing to share with me all of the things that they'd like to do outside of what they're focused on in the classroom, all of these creative outlets that are so important to them. So I feel that for myself as a poet, as a reader of creative writing, that we are really going to be in excellent hands with this next generation of writers because they are simply brilliant and bold and vulnerable in their work in a way that it took me a while as a writer to cultivate in my own work.
Well, your students are very lucky, but I'm so impressed about how we use many ways to sort of ease into the narrative voice. It can be scholarly, it can be academic, it can be personal, it can be poetic. Mm-hmm. And at BLR, we've become intrigued by the multitude of ways, of creative ways that we can actually present the written word. And Monique's poem, When It Smells Like Rain, was published in BLR issue 43, which is our special issue devoted to the theme of recovery. And this theme was so resonant that we teamed up with our friends at the Paige Fraser Foundation to give 4 of these poems, including Monique's, to 4 fabulous dancers. And these dancers interpreted the poems with their bodies, dances that were set to original music composed for the event, narrated by a professional actor and accompanied by sign language interpretation. The resulting film, called Reading the Body Recovery, was a winner of the Kites Berlin Film Festival, as well as the Theater Live Online Film Festival. And it also received honorable mention for the Vienna International Film Award. In fact, it received a total of 12 official selections for film festivals in Mexico, Greece, Canada, the UK, Italy, and all over the US, including a live screening right here in New York City. We'd like to share a brief clip of Monique's poem, When It Smells Like Rain, embodied, as it were, by the dancer Jerron Herman.
When it smells like rain, I know that you are coming. can feel your proximity and your intentions. My world is colored by the threat and your impulses. And so I brace myself. I want to crawl back into my warm bed and remember yesterday and there in the before when I was able and steady on my feet, ready to run. And now I'm not so sure. Perhaps there should be another word for depression. We've become too accustomed to the sound, the pressing together of its consonants and vowels against our tongue and teeth. There should be something more formidable in its place, for a thing that makes you forget yourself, dirties each stream you drink from, blows away the footprints of every road you have ever walked down until you become terrified that you'll never find the way back.
I know we only showed a small clip of this, but can you tell us, Monique, what was it like to see your words embodied like this?
I was very moved by the film in its entirety, but especially, of course, by the interpretation of When It Smells Like Rain. I found the choreography, the music, the reading of the poem, and the dancer. I found that they hit every single nuance in terms of the intensity and the intention of the poem.
I'm just curious, though, did you learn anything new about the poem from seeing it in this format?
Yes, the reading of the poem changed my own perception of the work. The next time that I read the poem, I actually hit the inflections that the reader did, and I found that it worked better. Yeah.
You know, it's kind of like the narrative arc, you know, you can't just write a poem without having a reader. Like the writing of the poem is just the beginning of the arc. You need the other person to receive it at the other end to complete the arc.
It changed my understanding of my work. Watching a dancer move to it, hearing the reader interpret it as she felt it, it changed my understanding of how that work should go out into the world. It really has.
Wow, that's such a powerful thing. And it really makes me think, you know, as writers, we're kind of writing by ourselves, having no idea where the words go and how they're received. And so you've had this opportunity, quite unique, to see your words received in so many different formats.
Yes, I agree. But again, a lovely, lovely interpretation, beautifully done from start to finish.
And it's fascinating to me that we think about the visual aspect of what's really a written form that we use, but it's really a beautiful complement to the words on the page. And actually, you know, at BLR, it's been so exciting these last few years. We've started to feature contemporary art on the covers of BLR, using art from, you know, all different walks of life. Even more exciting has been the chance to meet some of these artists, to be with them in their studios, to get their insights on the creative process. Earlier this summer, I paid a visit to the studio of Tatana Kellner, the artist whose painting appears on the front and back cover of issue 45, which is on the theme of taking care. Tatana Kellner's studio is in a beautiful area of upstate New York, out in the country. Kellner is a multi-talented artist who does printmaking, drawing, collage, painting. She creates art installations, artist books, and is the founder of Women's Studio Workshop in Rosedale, New York. As the child of Holocaust survivors and as someone who escaped the communist Czechoslovakia of her youth, Kellner's work interrogates politics, the economy, the environment, and social justice issues. She's also not shy with a ping pong racket. Again, thinking about our theme of taking care, there's something so gentle in the offering. Either they're holding the head, cleaning.
Yeah, it's almost like it's caressing, like holding and then caressing.
Yeah.
Yeah, I mean, the head looks unwell. You know, somebody who's unwell. So this is somebody taking care of that person.
I'm curious if the theme of caregiving in the art world, like how artists take care of each other or mentor other ones, does that resonate for you at all?
Well, I think because the work I have done at the workshop, for over 4 decades. Yes, I mean, it's about bringing up the next generation and also teaching people or giving them vocabulary so they can practice what they're passionate about.
You're here alone in the studio, all this art, all of this emotion. How do you take care of yourself in there?
I think by making more work. I think by that, I'm the happiest.
Thank you, Tatana Kellner. And I'm so pleased to be joined now by BLR's nonfiction editor, my friend and colleague, Dr. Damon Tweedy. And nonfiction and BLR can be very vulnerable as people are writing about deeply personal things they've experienced. And Damon, you've had extensive experience writing about personal experiences in your book, Black Man in a White Coat, which, by the way, was a bestseller. Can you share with us some of the approaches you take as a writer when you are bringing your own history onto the page?
Yeah, thanks, Danielle. Thanks for inviting me and having this conversation. I guess I would say two things. One is trying to make it relatable. So for a subset of people who share a similar set of experiences with the story that you're trying to write about, in my case, navigating the challenges of race in the medical world, how can you make it a relatable story, your own experience to others? But I think the second piece is how do you make it illuminating or sort of educational or informative to those who wouldn't share that experience, but can still find a way to connect to your own experience. So I think that's really that's sort of the sweet spot that I try to do with my writing.
Because we always talk about the difference between a moving experience and a moving piece of writing, because if you're writing about your pain or your experience, if it's not a moving piece of literature to someone else, they can just say, oh, shrug, can be tough.
Right. So the challenge is really to be able to bring them onto the page and really be able to share in your experience and kind of connect with you. Certainly the best writing, and I'm not certainly not saying that I'm the best writer, but the best writing in this world can really have that person, say that, wow, I really understood your experience in a very sort of real way, and I can almost put myself in your shoes. And so that's really the goal when you're trying to, tell these stories in this sort of nonfiction personal format.
When we asked our readers to send in their favorites, Barbara Kessel, a former English teacher, wrote in to say that she was so moved by the essay Vital Signs from issue 44. So we brought her together with the author, Rachel Mann, and I was the editor on that essay. And I remember it vividly because it does an unusual thing. It's a first-person narration, but uses the second-person point of view. So the author is talking about what happened to her, but saying you rather than I. And as all my co-editors know, I generally take a pretty dim view of the second-person point of view because so often it feels like a gimmick. But with Vital Signs, I was convinced. And I was convinced because it felt organically earned, though only upon this meeting with the writer and reader did I learn why.
I'm Barbara Kessel, an avid reader of Bellevue Literary Review. I am honored today to be able to talk directly to the best short story author that I have read in years, Rachel Mann. From the moment you start, the narrator keeps you close throughout this story of a miscarriage. Rachel, could you read some of it?
You wake to the sound of the nurse entering your room to take your vitals, because you are, despite the fog of your brief early morning sleep, still alive. Not that you're aware it is morning. There is no day or night for you now. Not since the rush of bloody fluid between your legs. You are confined in a hidden wing of the maternity ward, down the hall from where the live babies are born. With a tight expression and few words, the nurse takes your temperature and blood pressure. Later, your husband tells you there's a sign on the door reminding the staff of the solemnity of this room. You feel like an outsider, a foreigner, and not just because you're an American living in London. You're not supposed to be here in the maternity ward. Not yet.
I have read Vital Signs a number of times, and I cry every time. And so I want to ask you what choices you made as a writer to achieve that effect.
I'm mostly a fiction writer. And so I actually wrote this piece as fiction. And I had a trusted friend, another writer, who said to me, it needs to be told as your own story. And it was so uncomfortable for me to do that I almost needed a little bit of artifice. I, of course, wrote it in every possible point of view. I wrote it in third person. I wrote it in first person.
I think by being a fiction writer first and then trying all these different points of view, you ended up not only with a closeness, but with a distance at the same time.
The other things is that I started this piece in a workshop, and there was a prompt to write up to and towards a moment of violence.
Mm.
And there was something about that prompt, about thinking about it as an act of violence. And this was something that I'd been writing about this experience for years, very unsuccessfully. I was wondering if there were some details that particularly drew you in when you were reading the piece.
At the end, when you say you stroked the baby's red hair, that was so touching. And then the fact that its remains could be carried away in a lunchbox, that's what sticks with me.
I believe so strongly in telling the stories that women keep to themselves. And I think that's one reason why I kept coming back to this story, is because it's not the kind of thing you talk about in polite conversation. This was a very unique experience in that I don't consider it a miscarriage. It was a stillbirth. And I think that's really what was so dramatic about it, and that I, at the time, couldn't believe I had to go through, that there wasn't an alternative, was a shock to me. And still, when I think about it, or when I reread this story, which I had to do many, many times in the process of getting it ready to submit to Bellevue Literary Review, and then also in the kind of amazing editorial process with their editors.
How did you handle it emotionally?
I cried so many times reading and rereading this story. I don't think I've ever worked on anything that did that to me.
Mm-hmm.
When the piece was accepted to Bellevue Literary Review and I realized I was going to have to keep working on the story, it was hard. But I will say this, I felt like this piece was in great hands from the very beginning. I felt like it landed in the right place. Like, this is a journal that understands why we need to write about the physical experience of being human. And that's why it's so gratifying to hear from you that you were touched by it.
This is a journal that understands why we need to write about the physical experience of being human. Wow. We need to hire this writer to do our PR. Damon, you've read and edited many nonfiction manuscripts for BLR. Is there anything that has stood out to you in the way that writers grapple with the physical experience of being human?
Well, I think what really connects with me is the idea of how the physical experience is also an emotional one, and often the emotional one is also a physical one. I think that's really, the essays really capture that well. I mean, how do we process these things, these dueling, interlocking sort of experiences? And I think that's also true for some of the other essays we see a lot of with caregivers, and how do caregivers deal with those who are very ill. And there's also, again, a very emotional, deeply emotional experience, but also can be a very physical one. So I think those concurrent experiences are very powerful to me, and really sort of, as a reader, I can sort of feel both the physical side of it and the emotional side simultaneously as I'm engaging with that person's story.
Yeah, and sometimes, nonfiction writers will braid in another aspect of their life, whether it's gardening or nature or some historical incident to kind of reflect the current physical feelings, which I find a fascinating technique.
Exactly. Yeah, exactly. So I really just, I think just to echo what you said, the way you can sort of get those two things together really brings forth the best writing of this type.
And as I mentioned, Rachel Mann's essay, Vital Signs, appears in BLR issue 44. And the cover art for this issue is really stunning. And it's unlike anything we've ever run before on the cover of BLR. And it's by Alexander Gorlizki, who is a British-born artist. And earlier this year, I had a chance to visit his studio in Dumbo, Brooklyn. Gorlizki is a multimedia artist who early on became fascinated with the ancient tradition of Indian miniature paintings. He collaborates with artists in Jaipur, India, and maintains an active studio there. And when you see his art, you can feel how he's absorbed the wide-ranging colors, styles, and energies. For Gorlizki, almost any possible object can be a canvas for art, and his studio is bursting with color, creativity, and surprises at every turn. So I'm curious, when you start, do you start with an image, an idea, a design, a thought, a process, a feeling? Where do you start?
I think of drawing very much kind of in the way that I think of play, that it's both something quite open-ended, it's also very serious in a way. And sometimes what I find with drawing is that I can start off with a very clear idea, but then it kind of turns round where I'm kind of following the drawing, following the hand. And then it comes back to me driving it. So the process is quite open-ended. I'll start off with a piece of paper, start sketching, and then when I see things, I'm kind of responding to them often. So now, over the years, I've kind of developed quite a large archive of imagery. So, for example, let's say this work has its origins in this. There might be quite a traditional elephant. In this case, it's floating on a piece of rock under a palm tree. So what you have is, in the end, is a kind of a narrative, but it's quite, I think of the viewer as the meaning maker. So the idea, is that when you look at it, your interpretation would be very different to how someone else would look at it. It's really not didactic, and I suppose I think of that in the way that poems are often written. It's kind of suggests images, but then the way they're interpreted is very personal.
Where do you keep track of all your images?
Well, everything comes back to drawing for me. Whether I'm working with two-dimensional images or three-dimensional images, or designs for wallpaper or clothing. So this, for example, some people won't know what this is. It's a Rolodex. And historically they were used to kind of keep contacts, phone numbers and so on. So, I have hundreds of notebooks, drawing books and so on. And what I realized was I'd never look back at them. So I started kind of going back to old drawings, old notebooks, and would transcribe some of the images. So this becomes a kind of an archive of imagery from works that I may have made years and years ago, but then they might
As mentioned in the beginning, tonight's event is a benefit as we aim to raise money to support BLR. Supporting BLR, of course, is not just supporting literature, it's supporting people, writers, artists, poets, editors, all of the people who make the creative juices flow. It's a large and interconnected team. And one of our most important team members is BLR's communications manager, Melissa Pagnotta. Melissa has been with BLR for just under a year and has brought a rush of enthusiasm and energy to all of our operations, especially our newsletters, social media, our events, and our website. And when we were interviewing for this job position, Melissa happened to be the first person we interviewed, and we were all blown away. And after the interview, we were like, she seems perfect, let's just hire her. But of course, you can't just hire the first person you interview, right? Everyone knows that. That's ridiculous. So we kept interviewing, and at some point we realized, what? This is crazy. The first person really was the best, and so we hired her. So please welcome Melissa and Lola.
Oh, hi. Melissa and Lola here again. Hope you're enjoying Narrative Arc. Lola's loving it so much that it's inspired her to write her next poetry collection. I just hope it's not all about fish again. As communications manager of BLR, I promote our events, get to engage with readers online, and find creative ways to highlight our amazing writers. I get a cat's eye view on what makes BLR so special. Our community of curious readers, writers, and team, and our unique intersection of writing and medicine. As I'm sure you've experienced like I have, BLR helps us process what it means to be human, whether you're a reader or a writer. And those lessons from just one piece can last a lifetime. So if you enjoy BLR as much as we do, we hope you'll consider making a donation to help us publish even more writing, support new authors, and inspire even more people. Any donation is appreciated of any amount. And here's some ways that yours can help. $150 pays for a BLR story or essay, so you get to pay an author like Lola. $500 pays for an event like COVID and the creative process, and $2,500 pays for all the authors in a single issue. Thank you for your support. And we're so grateful that you're part of our BLR community.
The COVID pandemic was obviously a long slog for everyone. BLR shifted to online events along with everyone else, and we love online events like tonight's narrative arc because they allow us to reach a much larger geographical audience. I mean, there are a few people out there who don't see New York City as the center of the universe, and for some reason live elsewhere. And so online events are a way to reach a national and international audience. But once the pandemic receded a bit, we also realized how much we miss the energy of live arts, of being in the room with artists as they create, of sharing that sizzle with fellow audience members. And thanks to support from the BLR community, from folks like you, we've been able to produce a number of high-profile live events this year. BLR was incredibly pleased to host Abraham Verghese for his book launch of The Covenant of Water. This was Abraham Verghese's only New York appearance for what turned out to be a best-selling novel and a major literary event of the season. We hosted the event at the Center for Fiction in Brooklyn, and it was completely sold out.
Do you think we can incorporate literary fiction into medical training? Would that help our medical students? And if so, how would we actually do that?
Yeah, I would say categorically yes. I mean, I think most medical humanities programs believe in that. So you can teach a medical student about child abuse, refer them to a pediatric textbook, but you have them read Dorothy Allison's Bastard Out of Carolina, and they will feel what child abuse is. You want to teach them about end of life, you can point them to a palliative care textbook or send them to The Death of Ivan Ilyich by Tolstoy, and you will feel.
This fall, we produced Taking Care, an evening of live storytelling at New York's iconic Symphony Space Theater. This event sold out within 24 hours of tickets going on sale. Created in collaboration with the Nocturnists, we brought live storytellers to the stage exploring the topic of taking care.
Listen, Louisa, these doctors, they're having a bad day, their schedule's backed up, maybe they're having problems at home, we don't know. It's up to you to make it nice for them, tell a joke, compliment them, whatever it takes for them to see you as a person, because then you'll get better care.
The highlights of my childhood don't look like his. I don't really know what I'm doing. And at that moment, I want to ask my mom, how do I go on?
The reality was a lot less pretty. Just a few weeks postpartum, my mother was probably still bleeding from her womb. And now she's bleeding from her heart too.
There was such an amazing energy in the room as the audience and storytellers connected over these powerful, personal stories. Another BLR live event was Dialogues and Creativity at the New York Academy of Medicine. We screened our Reading the Body film and then hosted a conversation with the audience and a panel of artists, writers, and medical folks. The audience was passionate and engaged, reminding us how the intimacy of connection fosters creativity. These in-person events are much more complicated to produce and much more expensive, but totally worth it when you see the reaction of the audience and feel a community being created in the moment. And when you make a donation to BLR, your gift directly supports events like these and the artists who create them. And so we're very excited to share with you soon in next year's roster of events. But we also remain committed to our online events, to bringing together a global community near and far. Now, one of the key aspects of creating an online event is to have a brilliant video editor. When we hired Rosalind as our editorial assistant, we knew she was a good writer and had editorial experience, but we didn't realize what a talented visual artist she was and what a great video editor she was. Rosalind has taken over BLR's website as well as all of BLR's online events, including tonight's. Now, the one thing that Rosalind apparently is not very good at is naming her cats. And so I am pleased to introduce Rosalind Aparicio Ramirez and the White Cat and the Baby.
Hi everyone, I'm here with the baby, and we'd love to say thank you for spending some time with us this evening. As you can see, this past year we've had the honor of collaborating with some amazing organizations for our in-person events, which have also given us a chance to spend some face-to-face time together. Most days, these guys are my coworkers. During the thick of the pandemic, many of us had to get creative with ways to foster community while staying indoors. For us, that meant expanding our online events. And while it's been great to get back to in-person, we've also been able to grow our selection of online programming. This year alone, we've had the honor of hosting insightful book talks with writers Sarah Rule, Jasmine Brown, and Marie Myungok Lee, as well as a short film event in collaboration with the Unlonely Project. We've also hosted a spring reading with our 2023 contest winners and a fall reading on the topic of taking care, in collaboration with AARP. As the editor of most of these events, I get to spend a lot of time with these conversations. None of these events would be possible without your support, and I can't wait to share with you all the events we have coming this next year. Now, if you'll excuse me, I have to onboard my new assistant, the turkey.
Thank you to Rosalind and her literary menagerie. And now we're up to our last pair of reader-writers in tonight's narrative arc. And I'm so pleased to welcome Ronna Wineberg, who is BLR's founding fiction editor. Welcome, Ronna.
Thank you, Danielle. I'm very happy to be here.
And the reason that Ronna is joining us tonight is that reader Janice Deal wrote into us to say that her favorite BLR story was The Awful Thing from issue 36. And Ronna was actually the editor of that piece. And so, Ronna, what can you tell us about The Awful Thing?
The narrator is a woman whose mother, Liz, has dementia and is living in a nursing home. Liz develops a love affair with another resident, Harmon. Harmon also has dementia, and he also happens to be married.
So, one of the ways that great fiction becomes great is when situations put characters under pressure. And this story certainly does that.
Yes.
Ronna, what do you remember about working on The Awful Thing?
Well, I remember liking the story very much right away. I liked the humor, the poignancy, the insights about Alzheimer's disease and how the disease affects not only those who are ill, but members of the family. And I remember the relationship between Harmon and Liz, which was really touching. They were older, they were demented, they had Alzheimer's disease, but they were in love.
Right. We don't often think about, love between people with dementia, especially if you forget that you're married or forget that you are a widow, and yet love is love.
That's right. Exactly. And that really comes through in the story. And the author and I worked on the end of the story. There was dialogue between the children of Liz and Harmon, the adult children. We condensed that dialogue and then we moved it up in the story so that the story would now end with 2 paragraphs that led the reader back to Liz and Harmon and their romance.
Yeah, nailing the ending is one of the most important parts of the narrative arc. And working on that ending is something we do a lot of. In fact, we often spend most of our time, working on endings of stories. And so we're very excited to bring reader Janice Deal together with the writer Christina Robertson, author of The Awful Thing.
I hope you'll read us an excerpt from The Awful Thing.
Awkwardly draped Happy New Year crepe paper banners, silver plasticware, streamers, and white balloons force a kind of undeniable, if manufactured, cheer upon us. Many have donned glittery party hats and hold onto noisemakers. Karen and Beatrice from housekeeping are dancing with each other and any of the spit-shined residents they can coax up. Visiting family members coax as well or sit dutifully beside their vacant mother, father, sister, brother, or spouse, trying to share the mock excitement, or perhaps just trying not to cry. I can't bear to look at the sallow faces of those residents who are totally lost. Instead, I paste on a smile and step aside, allowing my mother to make her entrance. It's been 2 weeks since the pants incident, and a full week since any improprieties have been filed by the staff. As far as I know, equilibrium, as defined by no one dropping their pants, has been restored on 4 West. All we have to contend with is everything else. My mother glances at me, then toddles into the sea of dithering revelers. In his aged, graying body, with its slight jowls and sags, Harmon's eyes shine like polished onyx when he sees my mother. He is sitting in the circle of chairs with his wife, who holds onto his hand. Quivering and quaking, he suddenly makes an effort to rise. They are playing Moonlight Serenade. Of course, I want to know about what might be your favorite moment or moments in the story.
The first thing I've got to tell you that comes to mind, and I promise no spoilers, is the ending of this story. As a reader and a writer, I know how hard it is to nail the ending. In that space, you somehow manage to get to the heart of what it means to be human, even when disease has the power to rob us of so much. I wonder if you can speak to the tools you drew on to access that nuanced conversation between humor and pathos.
I'm glad you asked about that, because it became a huge part of the experience for me personally when my mother was going through this. We were going down this long road together. When she was finally moved into a nursing facility, I was anguished and felt very guilty. I feel like I went back to what helped me navigate difficult emotions while working with psychiatric patients. And that had been the ability to find lightness in the darkest places. And I found that angle helpful in surviving the grief of slowly losing my mother. Bleak humor is a powerful tool when faced with such gravity. I mean, to me, that's how finding this sort of incoherent love between strangers on a locked ward sort of mitigates the truly awful thing.
It means a lot to me to let you know how much this story meant to me. Thanks to Bellevue Literary Review, I feel like the magazine is such a powerful engine for bringing out the vulnerability that illness, either emotional or physical, can bring to a patient, to people in the patient's life.
Bellevue Literary Review supports a vital link in the chain of healthcare services, poetry of the human experience at its most fragile and amazing.
Wow, what a beautiful way to close out the evening. And yet another crew we should probably hire to do our PR. Janice, our loyal reader, said, "The magazine is a powerful engine for bringing out the vulnerability that illness, either emotional or physical, can bring to a patient and to people in the patient's life. And your support allows this engine to flourish, connecting poets and writers, artists, editors, readers, viewers, listeners, doctors, patients, nurses, families. Please make your donation to BLR today." Christina, our writer, echoed that, saying, "BLR supports a vital link in the chain of healthcare services." And then I think she summed up what we are striving for at BLR: poetry of the human experience at its most fragile and amazing. Whew. Thank you, Christina. Thank you, Janice, for those touching words. Thank you to all the readers and writers who helped us explore the narrative arc tonight, exploring and examining the creative path that literature takes from the writer's head onto the page, into the journal, to the reader's mailbox, to their eyes, and to their heart, settling into the warmth of their memory. For all of us at BLR, there was such joy in helping sculpt that arc into existence. The strands of that arc are what creates the BLR community, and we are so glad that you are a part of it. Thank you for your support. Thanks for joining us tonight, for helping us to extend the narrative arc ever wider in the community, and we'll see you at the next event.